Start recording. Perfect. So my name is Sergio Rosas. I'm co-founder and CEO of Next Shift Learning. I'm not going to talk about Next Shift Learning. You'll hear from Tina in just a little bit, but I'm going to start off with an opening welcome prompt. This is how we always start our times together at Next Shift Learning. So we want everyone to answer in the chat. Thank you, Karen, for dropping in there. What's a time you stepped into growth confidently? What's a time you stepped into growth confidently? Take about a minute to think about your answer and drop it in the chat. So we're going to focus on confidence. You stepped into growth confidently. Ooh, love it. Jessica, I worked in higher ed for 15 years, moved to industry 2 years ago, which felt like a huge change. Yeah, that's definitely a huge change. Mary, the time I was told I was now in charge of sales training and had never been a trainer. Ooh, that's also a really good example. Jess, when I knew I had support to develop. Love that. Karen, when there was an established plan in place to anchor me. I'm going to call on Jessica. Do you mind just coming off mute and tell us a little bit more about what you dropped in the chat?
Sorry about that. Here I am. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Jessica. So I worked at Texas A&M University for 15 years. Actually went to school there and then got sucked in the best way. I'm a coach at heart. And so I was a career coach primarily within the business school and the School of Public Health. So HR and especially learning and development is kind of the other side of the table, right? Working in industry for what I was doing. So lots of transferable skills and experiences, but it felt huge at the time.
Yeah, we talk about transferable skills all the time and how we do that when we're designing experiences or training. But even if you have the transferable skills, it's still scary. It's not like a very comfortable feeling, but you're doing your best to lead with confidence in what you do know. Thank you for sharing. Mary, can you talk a little bit more about what you dropped in the chat if you're able to?
Sure, yeah. So I came into work one day and was told, congratulations, you are now the sales trainer, and you have a new group coming in 3 weeks to train of 5 people. And there was no curriculum, no anything. So I didn't have time to not be confident. I had to figure it out really quickly.
Didn't have time to not be confident. I totally understand that feeling. Did not have time to be confident. I remember, I'll share mine really quick. There was a time when I was asked to lead a project for, let's call it a major retail chain of coffee stores in the United States that started in Seattle. And I came from a social impact nonprofit background because I started to do a little bit of management consulting, and I had never taken on a big corporate client, right? And so I had no time, right, to think about not being confident, especially as I was the client lead. And I also had a bunch of transferable skills, but it was just really hard to manage. So if we go to the next slide, Aaron, we have a funny little meme to remind us about sometimes how this feels. Sometimes you're pushed into growth versus stepping into it. And there's a big difference. And I think all of these examples that we're hearing, we're being pushed into growth. So sometimes, you feel that rush falling off from this hillside. You might get some water in your face. You might get even some mud in your face, right? But all the time we're keeping on going, right? We're still changing and going through this water, right? To figure out how we get there. And that's really the topic of today, which is around adaptability, right? And so if we go to the next slide, we wanted to talk a little bit more about who we are before we get into what we mean by adaptability and its 3 components. So I'm going to turn it over to Tina, who's our co-founder and our COO, to talk a little bit more about who we are, who's Next Shift Learning, and what we're doing here today. Tina?
Hi, folks. I love that it's been a dynamic discussion so far and that people have already shared about their backgrounds. So It's only fair if we do the same. I'm going to formally introduce Next Shift Learning. We are learning lovers. We're workforce development experts. We really specialize in building learning curriculum that's very pragmatic and applicable and engaging, and then delivering a great learning experience so that that learning is sticky and it actually changes behavior. We really believe that anyone can be a good leader, and it is a journey for everyone through self-reflection, accountability, and today's topic, adaptability. Some of this kind of insight really came from the work that we were doing with clients such as Snap Inc., UCLA, Endeavor, which is a large talent management agency, Niantic, and others. We really helped them in upskilling their talent, and it became clear that leadership curriculum in particular was an area that everyone was struggling with, where the changing demands of the workforce sometimes were not on par with what kind of support people were getting to be able to meet those demands. And so we came together to really think about what is it about leadership that is common across roles and functions. And if you move to the next slide, here's our perspective. No matter the challenge or the industry, the function you're in, really each layer, each leader is navigating layers. First and foremost, you're navigating your internal thought patterns, how you receive information, what emotions come up for you, and how you process and regulate through them. Secondly, you're navigating really building trusting relationships with the people that you manage and those that you directly work with, recognizing their strengths, being able to be inclusive and tap into their points of view, and really bringing the best out of them in each circumstance. And then lastly, you're taking the knowledge and ability that you have to manage yourself, to really manage your team, to navigate through really, dynamic changing circumstances. You're really practicing adaptability for yourself and your team as a leader. And so that's where we'd love to focus some of our conversation today. In particular, we work with a lot of people in HR, L&D leaders, and we're constantly hearing about the pain points of what dynamic changes are happening to the folks in these functions. There's really rapidly changing workforce skills and demands for how they need to change or support the workforce. At the same time, there's little investment and even scarcer dollars than a few years ago for actually investing in their talent. There is constantly changing leadership and strategic upheaval from a lot of M&A activity, really rapidly changing context for how employees work together, whether they're in person, hybrid, virtual, and then their reactions to those changing policies. And then lastly, an increase and then unfortunately a sharp drop in really DEI investment and the commitment to equity in particular. So, we wanted to really create this conversation of this space for those of you in the field to directly hear from two experts on how they've deployed adaptability as a skill and navigate through some of these changes, and then also hear from you on what's resonating and what you're navigating through. So with that, I've been using the word adaptability a lot. It sounds like a buzzword, but I really want to have Serge help us break it down and what it means to us here at NSL.
Yeah, so we're going to set up some definitions, but we're going to source the definition first from you all. So again, what does it mean to be adaptable? I'm going to ask you all to think about that and drop it in the chat. Give us your own definition. Go back to the examples that you all were listing in the chat, right? What does it mean to be adaptable? So I'll give you a minute, think about it, and start dropping in the chat. Thank you, Jessica. Rising to the challenge. Ooh, I see a +1, 100%. Mary, it means the ability to be open-minded about change and set the examples for others, ability to lean into change. Thank you, Rachel. Aaron, being able to apply your skills, knowledge in novel situations. Melissa, applying communication skills to various subjects. Love it, love it, love it. Any others? Any others? Feel free to drop it in. So as you all think about adaptability, right? Let's give you a quick definition of how we're using adaptability. So if we go to the next slide, we see it as the ability to adjust one's approach or behavior in response to new, unpredictable, or changing circumstances. So that's a mouthful, but let's break it down to 3 key components around adaptability, which we think is really important when we're thinking about, I know in the past I've gotten feedback from managers saying, hey, Sergio, you need to be more adaptable. I was like, well, what does that mean? Right? That can mean so many different things. And so we spent a lot of time thinking and talking to people around adaptability, having these conversations with you all as an example of how we broke it down into 3 components. So if we go to the next slide, some of you already named this in the chat. It requires flexibility, so modifying our approach to tasks and challenges based on changing circumstances or new information. It requires some resilience, quickly recovering from setbacks, adapting to difficult situations, and maintaining focus and productivity despite challenges. Now, you don't always have to be resilient because there's burnout that happens oftentimes when we're constantly trying to be resilient. So we'll talk a little bit more, but we're going to hear directly from Morgan and Stacey, right, about this. And then open-mindedness, being willing to consider new ideas, perspectives, and approaches, even if they differ from our own. Now, you can take a mental snapshot of this, but we'll revisit these definitions in the context of our conversation with our really good friends and colleagues, Morgan and Stacey. So let's give them a shout. We're so excited for them to be here. So let's meet them. Who are they? I know they're here with us, Stacey and Morgan. We're gonna do a quick round of intros between the two of you, really fast. Name, location, daily job, and I changed this. We did have time to prep, y'all, but I changed it. So I said, last time you were adaptable, big or small. Last time you were adaptable, big or small. So who wants to kick it off first?
I'll go.
Thank you. Good.
Just know I'm still thinking as I'm talking about my big or small, but I didn't want there to be any more silence in the room. My name is Morgan Williams. I am located in Brooklyn, New York. 1 to 2 things about what I do. Let's see. I work in HR. I lead Peak HR. It's both a training for HR people that are either interested. We have Basecamp for that, but if you are also already in HR and trying to figure out how to level up, we have the skilling program, and then we also do fractional HR services. All right, and now for the question. The last time that I was adaptable, I would say literally last Friday, during CrowdStrike. I think we could all say that now that I'm thinking about it. I was actually supposed to be taking a flight that day and it got canceled, so everything changed very rapidly. And so I had to be adaptable. It was a global situation. There was really nothing you can do, and I just had to remember the things that I could control and what I couldn't. And then I also, like everybody, was facing other things that were maybe more challenging than what I was like looking forward to.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that, Morgan. Stacey, you're up.
Yes. Okay. Quickly. So I am currently the product lead for learning products at AWS. I'm working to onboard, upskill, reskill, make new careers for people who work in global data centers. I am a recovered academic. So Jessica, I feel you. I spent a good 20 years in higher ed studying how people learn, and just fascinated by it overall. Adaptability beyond right now. Sergio, you like forcing us to do this. I think this morning, my kiddo was supposed to head to camp and prepare herself and have it all ready. And I have talent calibration reviews this morning. I needed to be on a commuter bus. I couldn't get on the commuter bus fast enough because she didn't pack all of her things. So, you think quickly and try and think of everyone else's needs, and all the ducks will line up after taking nice deep breaths.
Yeah, I love that, those two examples that you're both leaning into your lived experience. And that's the other thing that we oftentimes talk about in Next Shift Learning, like not forgetting the personal, right? The personal translates to the professional. And we really have to start that even when we build out any kind of learning experience, particularly around leadership, right? Because we are all leaders here, right? It doesn't matter what title we hold, right? And we've probably been leaders for several years. I would even consider like the first job you were leading components of some kind of project. But oftentimes that's not recognized because, we think about titles, and adaptability happens at all stages of life and career as well. So I love that you're leaning into that. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about a time you chose to be adaptable. And I know you two have an example for this. And we're going to revisit this example to break down the definitions. Remember, I said you don't have to remember the definitions because we were going to use examples to do that. So we're going to talk about adaptability and its three components, right? But we're going to start off with your example, right? So the two questions I have, and Stacey, Morgan, you can, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, who wants to go first? Why were you forced to be adaptable in your example? And what did you learn in the context of your own leadership?
All right, I'll jump in because Morgan volunteered the first time. So here we go. I'll give product examples and I'll give examples for learning and development because that's sort of my corner of the world, and connected to HR because my learning product was an HR product. Yes. All right. So we were asked to develop learning in the flow of work for an HR product. The product was something where managers needed to go in and make decisions, and we needed to provide training for them to understand what those decisions would be. Not surprisingly, for the L&D people in the room, they asked us to probably put together 5 different trainings for, a 30-second space. So I narrowed it down to 2, but then on top of that, they were going to get 1. Like 1 is all the human brain could handle within that space and the design space and all of that. So as a leader, I had to focus on helping my team figure out trade-offs, knowing they're going to disappoint someone in the process, knowing that they aren't going to be able to do all the things that they wanted to do, despite wanting to think big and dream big about a solution, right? So the example I like to use, and I wish I could credit someone with this, maybe someone later could tell us who said this originally, but I coach my team to think about juggling. If you're juggling a lot of balls, we have a lot of balls in the air. We say that all the time, right? We're worried about them falling, but not all of them are made of glass. Some of them will bounce. Some of them will fall and not break, and you can pick them up later, but some of them are glass. And that really helps me have perspective in the moment because, our nervous system reacts pretty quickly when we think we have a threat to go through, and everything feels like glass because it often has a compounding effect. But realistically, they can't all be glass. Not everything can be an emergency. Something has to take precedent. So in that space, I told them specifically what is a must-have versus a nice-to-have. And we set these 2 camps together. We can make a list if it makes us feel better. We can put it in a parking lot. We can put a pin in it. You can call it whatever you want. But essentially, you've got 2 lists, nice to have and must have. And then from there, really encouraging each of my team leaders and preparing them, standing behind them so that they can take this, which is important for you as a leader, because if you take it all on, you can't persevere, right? So really empowering the leaders on my team to own some of these actions, practice saying no for some of them that where it's harder, I have them practice with me and we can role play. All right, tell me you're not going to do the thing that they want. And I kind of help them think through it and they get more comfortable with it. And over time, you get very comfortable, I hope, saying no to things. And then, Serge, should I give my second example on the how much time do I have? Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing, one of my favorite leaders suggested in our team meetings, we would kick off these team meetings with a round robin of what you said no to this week. And it normalized saying no. It helped each of us applaud each other. So you got celebrated for saying no. And if you didn't that week and you were feeling really run down and overrun and overwhelmed, you got to say, oh, I probably should have said no to a couple of things this week. And sometimes you're the person they said no to. And you got to humanize someone else in this experience, realizing, right, sometimes trade-offs just require that we only lean into one thing and stop with another. So I love that idea. And I've adopted that with every team I've led moving forward. In fact, my new team is going to get used to that here pretty soon as I've just joined a new role at AWS. But to say, hey, what do we say no to this week? We give it a quick clap and then we move forward. Those were a couple of things that really, really, I think, helped me to start to figure out how to measure these trade-offs, how to make it work. Handing off to you, Morgan.
Sounds good. A moment I was forced to be adaptable. Being in HR, I can't think of any bigger moment than COVID. It literally is still impacting our workflow today. And so I think it's just something to really think about. You may think of this being in like a one moment, but now it's years. So we're still thinking through it. And how that happened was I was first starting at Casper. They just IPO'd the month before. We were, headed to open up all of these new stores. And the first day, my boss said, there's something called coronavirus. I'm putting you on this team. I want you to handle it. Now we all know what coronavirus is today. And also, I was over all of our retail teams. And immediately I knew that this was going to be a big deal. Like, I just don't know how I do, but something told me we're not prepared for this, probably because I wasn't prepared and I literally just started a new job. So like I already had anxious energy. With that being said, I knew at that point I was going to have to step in and make decisions very clear cut. Knowing that we didn't know so much, we didn't need to lean into long-term decisions. We needed to lead into short-term controllable decisions and a wait and see approach, which often it's not comfortable for a lot of executives, but I also know from being a psychology major, whenever you start to try to change things or you promise and underdeliver, what that does to the employee experience. And I didn't want that. So I was like, look, I'd rather say something and be more stringent at the top and then lead with more flexibility later than be super, super flexible on something we don't know and can't control. And then automatically we're stringent. At least we're kind of getting them acclimated to a certain type of culture. Also, it was under my remit to make sure that all of our stores in the US, including Canada, Texas, Florida, New York, California, we're all on the same page with our policies. Now, if you remember COVID, that seemed like an impossible task. That being said, and so I was really up for the challenge. And I just also remember thinking, I'm human. I'm not the only person that is going through this. We're all trying to figure this out. Who are people that have potentially figured this out before me? Who has had to think about this and have seen this coming around the corner? Because I don't have time to go do all the research to get where I am. Who can I leverage? Who's already done some of the research? And the first thing that came to me were colleges. And so I've really started to look at like, how are they teaching this? They have government funding. So they're having to deal with a lot of regulations. They have people that are coming in from all different states. I had a bunch of different states I was worried and working over. And they also had students that were scared. I had employees that were scared, so we had a lot of similar structures that we were trying to see. And I knew that they would be somebody that I could look after. So I looked at a lot of their policies. I looked at what their messaging memos were sending to students, what they were sending to parents, because it enabled me to utilize that. And so I think it's really important to understand you don't have to take it all on your shoulders. Even when it is all on your shoulders, you can sit up there and leverage people who may have been a step or two before you. That was very important for me in my job. So,
I love it. So here are the gems I'm picking up from both of you in terms of adaptability. So if we go back to our monkey meme, someone pushing you into a situation, you're like, I'm falling, right? But I need to get this done. It's like you can be adaptable, but like there's some considerations around adaptability, right? So understanding trade-offs, understanding you might disappoint someone as you're being adaptable, right? How to temper visionary expectations, right? I really love this quote from you, Stacey, recognizing the glass balls versus the bouncy balls, right? And heavily prioritizing. Morgan, you said into specifically around COVID, right? Leaning into more stringent short-term and balanced long-term flexibility, right? So like being like upfront and direct, identifying others who have been in your shoes. So like I really love this idea that you looked at higher ed, you looked at the analogous experience, right? So, organization, an approach to comms, right? I think the other thing I heard you say, Stacey, was around the importance of empowering leaders to own action. So like helping them adapt to your style and what your expectations are, and making sure you're able to say no. Just because you're being adaptable doesn't mean you say yes. Actually, you should be saying a lot more no's, right? To give yourselves time. So super appreciate all those gems. I hope I captured them and did them justice. But we're gonna go on to the next one. So let's talk about some components. Same example, but let's lean into how did you define flexibility in the context of your example? How did you define flexibility in the context of your example Thank
wanna
you
go
Kate,
first,
for dropping
Morgan?
in the definition. What was that?
She was asking if I wanted to go first, and
Oh,
I
there you go.
Um, I think I also took the approach of, look, I'm not a doctor. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what this is. Have I worked in hospitals? Yes, but I also have to have grace towards myself. I don't know everything about this, and this isn't my area. Am I asking, like, is somebody asking me to take this on? Of course they are. And am I going to take this seriously? Of course I am. But there's going to be probably some humility within this process. I have to let go of my ego, you know what I'm saying, and lean onto people and also really understand this is not my subject matter expert. We're all dealing with something and that's very uncomfortable. And so I think the other portion is letting people know I don't know everything, saying it right there out in front of the gate. As soon as I know, this will be our comms procedure. So people could feel calm in the moment and also know as soon as I'm getting things, I have to prep it for certain people, our executives, our C-suite, and then roll it out to our teams. And when I do that, I'm doing it with people in mind. And so I think doing that also let people know, one, I'm being upfront. I'm not saying I'm the know-it-all in this group. So yes, I'm already establishing there are times I will likely be wrong. I'm okay with that, but know that I'm doing my best. Also, before I come to you with knowledge, I'm vetting it through several circles and then coming to you. So the plan won't be changing so much instead of coming to you and we have to keep tweaking it. So once you get something, knowing that it's going to be set for a bit until we have the next change. And then I think the other thing is just saying I'm human and like giving myself grace. I think that that is a huge important thing, especially when you're taking on new work. We can be the hardest people on ourselves. And this was a huge task and a new organization that had a lot of eyes on it. And I think the way that I knew I was going to be able to move was the more authentic I can be, which is like, hey, this is me. Like, this is me. I am trying and like, give me grace, And I think when I can show that and say that, it makes people feel a lot more comfortable, even in a very uncomfortable situation. And I would say that truly was something that, helped give me flexibility and approach to like modify any changes that I needed going forward. But I also addressed what that would look like. So there was a temperament, there was already something that was set out. So people knew the phases of how we were getting there as well. No surprises.
I love that. I love hearing that. And I just want to lift up what Mary said, which is acknowledging you don't know something is the highest level of confidence. Love that. That's a really great insight, Mary. Stacey, what about you?
Yeah, I love that a lot. It's a good reminder even for today. Thank you, Morgan. I'll carry that forward as my nugget for the day. The two things I think that call out to me are listening and defining and communicating a path forward. So in the COVID example, I remember being calmed considerably when I saw my leaders telling me what's next. I think that really helped in the adaptability space. For my example, I had to figure out, I'm a big data person. So that also helps me really stay grounded in what to do next and how to adapt. It's sort of a cheat sheet, right? If I'm letting data drive my decisions, I'll know also with my gut instinct, but essentially where do I pull back and where do I lean in? So with my example with the product, having to build learning content around these product pieces, I needed to know where my stakeholders were embellishing their needs and where the data actually pointed to real needs. I'm a big fan of anecdotes without a doubt, but they are best supported with some other data so that we don't have sort of, a bias toward recent interactions and just people's personal belief. Um, Education, like many of you know here, is something everyone has received. So everyone's an expert in at least how they learn. It's tough when you're trying to serve a larger audience. In my case, it was at least 50,000 people. So one person's point of view wasn't going to be as helpful for me as trying to get something in the aggregate. So figuring out where people have embellished the truth so I could help kind of plan better, creating a safe and vulnerable environment where people could be honest about their feasibility of the work. I think this is where, Morgan's saying, hey, I'm human. I'm doing the best I can. This is where we're at. I needed my staff to tell me that too. Instead of them being afraid and saying, yes, we can build those 3 widgets and we can build this workflow by Tuesday, I needed them to go, I can't do it. I want to. I know what they want. There's no way I could get this done in a week, so that I can start to temper expectations for my leaders and my stakeholders and say, all right, we had a change. Here's what we can do. You wanted 5 trainings, you're getting 1. And here's what 1 will look like. And here's how we'll get there. And then we'll build 2, 3, 4, and 5 in these next phases moving forward. Everyone was able to get on board when they knew they were going to get what they want or close to what they wanted and why. I think that's the other big part, right? Is communicating what's next and why. When you work with smart people, which all of us do, everyone does better when they know why you've made a change. They may not like what you say, but if you've communicated why you're having to do it, everything goes smoother and is more on board. And then you're reminded too why you made a particular change. And being human, I can't change my mind. New data just came in. It looks like COVID is not transmissible through touch. We don't have to wash our groceries every time we bring them up, right? I think these are the types of things of being adaptable, and really communicating the path forward has been one of the best things for me. Even if people don't like it at first, you'll earn trust and build credibility by being able to be vulnerable and still share what you're doing next.
Yeah, I love what the two of you are sharing in our space around, particularly the component around flexibility, right? Which is like permission and grace, right? Is like the overarching themes. I love, Morgan, you said be okay with saying I don't know. It requires some humility and letting go of your ego. Be okay with being wrong, right? And that you're trying to get comfortable with just trying and letting others know that we're just trying, right? That's the flexibility, right? That is demonstrated, right? As a leader, right? As you're adapting, right? To changing circumstances like COVID, right? And like what that means for the business and how you conduct business. Stacey, I really love with the idea of communicating the next steps are important to ease any stress, to keep folks calm, and always explain the why. Because I think in the earnestness of when something changes, right, or we do an about face, right, it means that sometimes people will just take things on, right, just because like they are not sure what the next step would look like, right, or they assume what the next step look like. So I appreciate also that you said that it's really around creating a safe and a vulnerable space to talk about the feasibility of the work. And I oftentimes feel like we encounter that a lot. Like we don't talk about feasibility in the context of things changing, right? It's like, this is not feasible. And it's okay if I'm going to disappoint you, right? Because I'm just giving you like it is. And I think that's something that is hard to practice and put into motion, but it's a really good reminder to begin with that. So super appreciate, again, the gems here. And I love all of the chatter and what's being captured in the chat as well. Again, Mary, yes, psychological safety, right, is the root of all of this, and trust. So when you show flexibility, right, you are imbuing trust in that flexibility, right? Either to yourself, you're trusting yourself, or you're trusting others on your team, or you're trusting that your leaders like trust you enough to be able to be blunt and say, can't do this, isn't going to work. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. Awesome. Let's go into resilience, one of my favorite components of adaptability. So tell us, how did you define resilience in the context of your example?
All right, I'll hop up, Stacey.
One.
Okay. I have a few examples because I was dealing with multi-tiered levels. I had my C-suite that I was dealing with. I had my managers and directors that were out there in the field, and then I had store leaders as well as the just store employees. And so trying to deal with that many different people in a crisis is a lot, one. And so that's where I also had to remind myself again, I am only human. When do I have time to recharge? When do I have time to say my emotions? Because I'm constantly hearing everybody else's fears and their emotions. And I have my own, that I'm just dealing with, but I'm not ever getting a chance to kind of say in this space because I am the entrusted one that you leave this stuff with. So really, this is where I had to think about like therapy for myself, a place for me to have an outlet, something that was going to be beneficial for me if I'm taking on so much stuff. I need to figure out a way of how to get rid of it or not let it like seep into my body or my mind or my actions in this type of way that are going to stop me from doing this. The other thing I really had to think about was what I was tasked with and kind of what Stacey had said before, but like what is a must have and what is a like to have? We can start out with the minimal viable project. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what we can start out with, and then we can start adding in these other things that may make this wonderful. But like let's just get to the meat of what we actually have to do because it's already complex enough. If you recall at this time, laws were changing daily per states. We also had counties changing laws. So there were a lot of hoops to jump through to make it perfect. But it was like, what's the base frame, just a frame of the house that we can do and still live in, is what we were looking at. I think the other portion as well is I knew if leaders are coming to me and talking to me and having these feelings, these employees definitely are as well. How am I also making them resilient? Because I also cannot have everybody pouring everything into me. It was a lot of going back and explaining the why. It was a lot of letting them hear things out. And for instance, in the furlough process, before the pandemic, if you were furloughed outside of being a government worker, you were not paid. They changed that because so many people were mass furloughed. And so it was trying to get people understanding what that process is like, what a recall is like. People are like, what do you mean? I have a job. Like they're telling me now I'm not working. Like, what is this? And so really trying to educate them on the process and getting them to know the why, how we're going to do this, what's going to work, and making them understand when we furlough somebody, and if you're talking to them as a manager or employee about work, they have to be paid for work. And so that's why it's dangerous for you to talk with them. And it's not saying that I don't want y'all to have a community or to be there for each other. I do. I just want it to be consistent with compliance and understand the risks that are mitigated. So here's some language you can use to support them through these times so they can too be resilient. Of like, if you want to still meet with your teams, make sure you put in there, this is not about work. We won't be talking about work. This is not a paid call, whatever the case is. There's no need to join. You can join if you want to, trying to give them scripts so they could still build their team and build that, but also know that I'm there to support them. And while some of the things I say may be rigid, we have employment factors, and there's some things that I had to skill them up on of like, I need you to understand this. So that's why I'm rolling out this. I hear you and I want to support you, but I also need you to bring me in. Like, once again, Stacey was saying, tell me how you feel, because if you want this camaraderie, I can tell you how to get it, but I need you to tell me that. So I'm just telling you how not to break the law right now. If we need to go forward on this other path, I'm happy and willing to help you get here, but I need to give you the base frame first and get you to understand the why and the context. And everybody fell in line. And I also think that built strong bonds because they knew that they could have somebody to talk to. They also knew I would work with them and that I was there to see them through, and that these people did need community and somebody to talk to. So yeah.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Stacey, what about you?
Yeah. So, resilience. I think it's important to remember that resilience is not going 100% all the time, that sometimes resilience is 15%. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's a complete stop so that you can come back. So for that, I mean, knowing your limitations, being honest about it. The top, Morgan was saying, hey, I don't know what this is. I'm going to help you through it. I think knowing your own resilience space, having your team tell you, I can't make it happen. It won't work. These are important things, but also you may have to make that hard choice and come in and say, okay, you can't make it work. What can you do? Can you give 10% and be able to accept as a leader? Maybe they can't. And if that's the case, you adapt and find someone else to fill that space, because you still need to meet whatever requirements you have to have. Within the product context, I would need my teams to tell me where are the limitations. Is it a tech limitation? Let's dig in deeper. Is it because you're exhausted? We can find a solution for that. Is it because you're not getting the information that you need? All right, let's help you there. Is it because you don't have the software you need to build something? Or do you feel like you don't know how to write the code and you need help with the code? All of these things are things as a leader you can help them with so that their resilience can work and carry through. But if people feel like they have to go 100% and find their own answers, they won't be able to sustain. Even if they do, it's going to be for a short period of time. And we're looking for longer term, right? Sustainable resilience, not just making it through one crisis only to have another one pop right back up. I think the HR folks know that a bit more than anybody. As soon as you got over one hurdle, there's another one that's popping around the corner, right? With fewer and fewer resources. So for me, I think it's knowing that 100%. In addition to, as a leader, helping your team think through that. I think a lot of times, especially for people that are really hard workers, they may not even recognize that they're doing 150% and that it's okay to step back. It's okay to take a breath. And sometimes for people, that's a day and they can come back. For other people, it's a couple months. I personally have taken breaks like that, where I took a couple months off to regroup, and boy, am I thankful that I did, because now I can come back strong and do what I want to do, accomplish what I need to accomplish while being resilient and giving more, instead of kind of breaking myself down to only be able to give 20% on a more sustained basis. Really looking after ourselves, I think, is an important part of that resilience. Examples for me include, I try and make mindfulness a habit. Every morning, I will sit down in my front yard and challenge myself to listen for birds. Now, I am a nerd, clearly with my Star Wars reference, but that's a whole other level, I think, of bird watching and bird listening. Props to my birders out there. But for me to be able to actually hear birds among the noise and the voices that are also coming through with the pressures you feel, it was a great way for me to do it. Thanks, Erin. Other people like breathing exercises works. There's a lot of different things you can do, but I genuinely integrate those into my day probably 2 and 3 times to find that ability to be grounded, not just for myself, but for my team. Because if I can't have good listening ears, I can't be resilient either to help folks troubleshoot.
I love that you're both focusing in on this element of the humanness factor, but like focusing yourselves, like the importance of like taking the time to think about where am I, how am I feeling in the context of all of these crises, in the context of like managing all of these people and their workflows. Jessica, great book around slow productivity. The thing is, everything that you all said, this is all happening in the context of work. So how do I slow down, right? So that I'm able to re-energize and be productive again so that we can get our teams through a change, a different circumstance. I'm just going to pull 2 things, 2 gems from each of you. I know Tina's been capturing it and all of you have been capturing it too. But like the importance of like, what's a must have or nice to have. I really love this minimal viable project, right? And like even in the context, Morgan, I'll even extend like, how do you like educate folks on a process, right? And give them the why, but then also make space for them as to like why a certain process is in place, right? And if I hear you also, it's like not just process of doing work, but like checking in with teams, like and making space for teams to share because they might be burning out, they might not be feeling themselves, right? Especially what we all went through during the pandemic. Right. And then Stacey, right? I love saying you're not going to go 100% all the time. That's not what resilience means. It means a 10%, a 5%, or a complete stop. Right. And I also heard you say, Stacey, the importance of diagnosing what's happening on your team. Right. So like, is this a like work related thing, or is this something where maybe you need to take a little bit of a break and some time away, right? And being able to have those conversations so that you're demonstrating empathy, you're demonstrating grace, but you're also remembering that like we're all humans operating in under changing circumstances, and I think that's what leads to what you talked about, which is sustainable resilience. So I love these gems. I'm also recognizing on the time, right? And I do want to leave at least 5 minutes for Q&A. So we're going to do a quick round on the last component. And you've already touched on this, like implicitly, and you're like, as you're sharing these examples and stories, which love this, and thank you for the shout out about the format. This is all around sourcing wisdom on adaptability for us, right? So it's not on us to like tell you what adaptability is. It's like, how are we all experiencing it in the context of our work? But the last one is, how did you define open-mindedness in the context of your example? So maybe 1 or 2 gems around like being open-minded, right, in the context of what you were dealing with.
Yeah, I'll go. And it's pretty quick. It's really just going back to, I remember I had something to do, which was make a minimum viable product and really put it out there. I had to make sure that we had consistency. But the one moment that I was thinking about was one, myself and everything I had to do, furloughing these teams, these managers that have been with them for years or time. That was very hard for them. And that's why, they wanted to do everything that I said they wanted to do it right. But it really took me being open-minded of like, one, I have everything that I need to do this. Now, how can I service them? How can I get them, one, to be bought in on the process, but also how can I understand their concerns? which is how I understood of like, look, I've been talking with these people. I don't know if they're going to come back. I don't know if they're going to lose their job. These are teams that I support. I hired them. I really like these people. We were on this growth trajectory, just IPO'd, and now you're telling me I can't talk to my teams and we don't know how long. That really hit hard for me. I can only imagine, I didn't have that problem because my team's working with me. And so really understanding one, everybody has their own, I don't want to necessarily say incentives, but different things that they're prioritizing. For me, I was prioritizing getting the work done and the best way possible and as quick as I could. But it also took me having to hear from the people that I'm supporting that, hey, this is hard. There's emotional things with this. And it got me to think about, okay, cool. What's a framework for this on how to address that? I've become resilient in this process. Now, how do I make them resilient? But also, how do I get their buy-in and to understand you can come to me with these types of issues and I will look for a solution. Like I am your partner in this. It's not you just coming to me and telling me and saying, hey, I got to do this. Like that doesn't matter. No, I don't ever want anybody to feel that way. And so that's how I brought open-mindedness into this, restored trust. It really built collaboration. And we were also very unified. So anything I had to roll out, they were with me too and making sure that it was done. It wasn't that I had to check on it, babysit, or anything in that type of way. It was more so of like, we're doing this together. We see and we hear you. And like, this is the Casper team. This is our MO on how we want to do this. And it led from other teams. This happened to one specific manager that was really wanting to do this, and other teams heard about it and they all started doing it in a way because they were all feeling it. But it takes that one person to ask, right? And to figure out a solution. And I think they saw us completely willing to work with them, but I need you to let me know the challenge that you're facing in this, because right now my mind is laser focused on getting this done in this type of way. Honestly, I hadn't really thought about all the emotional impacts because I was moving so quickly with legal deadlines.
Thank you. So appreciate those examples. Like, love it, love it. Stacey, what about you?
Yeah, open-mindedness. For me, I think there's a phrase I try and keep top of mind all the time. And in meetings, I will write it on the board so that people see it. At home, I have it on a Post-it on my monitor, and that is to listen with curiosity. I think especially during times where adaptability is required, often high stress is often it's hard for people to show up as their best selves because they've got pressures of time, resources, whatever else it could possibly be. Reminding myself to listen with curiosity helps me stay open-minded so that I can hear the solutions and not quickly become defensive, not worry about future scenarios that aren't even probable, but it's our natural reaction to stress, right? So if I listen with curiosity, my trick to this is I will think of questions as someone is talking versus thinking of a way to relate to what they're saying. So if I'm listening to someone who is probably vehemently disagreeing with me, I can, instead of thinking of a response, right, to either why they're wrong or right or why I think differently, I instead try and think of a question in the moment. Whether I verbalize it or not is kind of unimportant. It just keeps my brain open to listening to what they have to say instead of stopping and then only worrying about what I want to say. So listening with curiosity is just fantastic. For anyone who's around teenagers a lot, this is a great tactic with teenagers as well, because they're often very triggering with their dysregulation of emotions, and they come out hot or they're insulting with their tone or anything like that will happen in the moment. I often will try and just, not tilt my head, but in my head thinking, that's an interesting perspective. Why do you think you don't need to wash the dishes, or whatever it might be, right? And that really does help, I think, for me to stay open-minded overall in pulling it together. There's some brain science behind this if anyone's interested. Rerouting the amygdala as part of your learning process helps you go remove yourself from fight or flight and get back into an open, vulnerable listening position. But especially during times when you have to adapt, it's also a great survival skill because it keeps you open to taking in whatever data you need, whether it's observational, audio, written, or just the information people are saying. Being able to keep your brain open to hearing will make a big difference.
I love this conversation, and I'm so sad that we only had an hour. But like, I'm gonna throw down some gems that I heard you both say. I heard empathy, right? Like sometimes it's important to being open to how others prioritize versus how you prioritize, because you'll find the solution in there when you're starting to listen more attentively. I love this. I am your partner, right? Like you sort of shift the dynamics, because sometimes like inherently there's a hierarchy, right? When we work in organizations, but I am your partner and I'm here to help you solve. And I'm also here for you, which brings me to the topic that you also touched on, is the restore and repair trust, Morgan. I think that's such a fundamental thing, that you need to be open-minded, not just like what's happening with the team, but like where are the rifts starting to happen, right? Because we're going so fast, we're moving so fast. We're not perfect. We're going to miss some things, right? And so how do you restore and repair? Stacey, if I ever get a tattoo, I will put that as my tattoo. Listen with curiosity, right? Making sure that understand that everyone has pressures, right? And sometimes you'll hear the solutions if you just make space, right, for folks and listen to their perspectives. And this like the emotional hijacking is so real, right? Like we have a 2.5-year-old, we know all about that. As they're developing in their little brains. And so sometimes thinking of questions versus like trying to formulate a response, and like sometimes when it's argumentative, actually helps to start that repair and trust process as part of being open-minded. I so appreciate our conversation, and this isn't the end, but we have time for maybe 2 questions from our participants, our audience. Thank you all for engaging in the chat. Love what you all are throwing down there, but does anyone want to come off mute and ask a question, a burning question? Or you can drop it in the chat.
I actually have a question for Mary. You dropped a comment earlier around the distinction for you between a framework and a process, which can be really rigid. Can you speak more to that? And would also love to hear from either Morgan or Stacey on whether they see a distinction.
Yeah, so Morgan, you were mentioning, you created a framework, and that always makes me excited because we have a tendency to create processes and procedures. If this, then that, if this, then that.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were talking about, we're talking about being adaptable here. And so a framework is more like a toolkit of different technologies and processes and skills. And so you're able to go in and say, this situation, instead of going, what's the process, you go, what's the situation and what's the best way to deal with the situation? And you pull from this toolkit within the framework.
100%. That's how I think of it. When I think of process, I'm thinking of, I have a lot more pen to paper. A lot of things have already been worked out. When I'm thinking of a framework, I think of it just like building something. This nail might be rusty. It may not go in all the way, So like we may have to have a step 3, step 4, really understand this. And also like, why doesn't this work? And that's the difference. It's much more nimble and flexible to me. Now, can processes change? Of course. But to me, by the time I lay it out in that type of format, it should be pretty much set, and something that they can go on. A framework, no, I'm just giving you an idea of how I think and how we can leverage this to get to where we need to be, not this is done. So yeah, I would agree with you there.
Love it. Melissa, I saw your hand raised. You want to go?
Yeah, thank you. Stacey, you mentioned that at the beginning of your meetings, you have the roundtable where you ask everybody to say, what did you say no to this week? I'm curious, like how long ago you introduced that into your practice, and kind of what that development timeline, like what you noticed along that development, like what happened before versus what happened after, and the different impacts on your team.
These are great questions. I would say it's about 5 years since I implemented it. And I found that people grabbed onto it pretty quickly. So getting people to say it was great. There's ebbs and flows. So there would be times when, people would have 5 things they said no to, and then they would not have anything. So it was a time for me as a leader to reiterate, hey, it's not okay that no one said no to anything this week. Let's work harder to find something. I found that as a practice, my team began supporting each other, which is the dream, right? I shouldn't be at the top of this. This should be a flat organization. So when they started encouraging and supporting each other to say no to something, they felt empowered that it was okay. And I noticed it started coming up in promos. So it meant that that trust was built among others. So when they would be on review for promotions of their colleagues, they would say, you know, this person's gotten really good at setting boundaries and they're really able to focus and deliver more impact because they said no to more things. It also generated some good discussion. So when they, you know, say you were the one, Melissa, who said no to me about something, and I was frustrated because I needed you to do that thing because I can't do my other thing if you don't do your thing. And then you say it in the meeting and hearing other people say, it was really great. And Melissa said no to that because she was able to do X, Y, and Z, something I didn't have any visibility into. Now I'm realizing she's a great partner. She's really helped me figure out how I can manage everyone together as a team. I've been really pleased with it. I'm excited to hear if other people adapt this, you know, share it with the group again, or put it on LinkedIn or somewhere if you can adapt it and make it even better.
I love that. Thank you so much. I so appreciate the conversation, all the gems that you both shared. Thank you for sharing in such vulnerable ways. Like, I really just love this conversation. I'm sorry that we have to cut it short, but we'll have more and more time to continue to explore all of these topics, right, in a future session, hopefully. And again, I wanted, before we wrap, I want to make sure that we have two quick announcements. I'm going to turn it over to Tina to talk about some quick announcements. But before we do, can we give a round of applause to both Stacey and Morgan for all of their time and just everything that you shared? Again, I'm walking away feeling really inspired by this conversation, so thank you.
I see we had some technical difficulty with those emoji reactions. I think it might work better on Google Meet. Yeah, hard fact to you, but it's not showing up on screen. Just a quick reminder, I know we all have really busy lives to get back to, but as we're facing so much uncertainty and just low information environments, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. And when you do, you can just focus on that next best step, communicating where you are, your trade-offs, and saying no, and that'll allow you to continue climbing forward. This was a great gem that Morgan shared with me earlier, so I just want to make sure that you all saw it too. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we continue to be a resource as this discussion hopefully enhances your leadership journey. There are two things we'll drop in the chat. The first is a practice guide for learning leaders when you're stretched in terms of resources. How do you maximize those and build really effective leadership curriculum? And then the second rather, is a reminder that Peak HR, fantastic leadership development cohort that Morgan leads for specifically people and learning leaders, is opening up their next cohort for the fall. So please sign up to learn more. And with that, thank you so much. We really love this discussion and hope that you take at least one gem away from you and it helps you to be more adaptable and to empower your teams. Thank you.